everyone, it's Dee Rondinella, Technology Training Coordinator for the Stark County District Library with this month's Sewing Saturday. For this particular Saturday, we are going to learn how to build a table runner that can also be a pot holder. I've got a couple of examples here in front of you so you can see the variety that you can make. For instance, this one that's very on top here, you're going to notice as I open it up, it gets pretty darn big. And this one is for the holiday, for Halloween, and I can use it on my dining room table. What you're also going to see is I can fold it right back up, and I can then store it when I'm done working with it. The next one that I want you to see is this one right here. This one is a quilt block that I put together. Now I haven't completed it because I wanted you to see the inside of one of these, and so you can have the understanding of all of the different layers that are in these pot holders. Now I've done a lot of research when it comes to these pot holders because I am using my mother's table that I had inherited. And I wanted to make sure that I was truly protecting it. And so I found that there was some different types of utility cloth that I could use inside, but there's also that whole bit that we have to worry about when it comes to the number of layers. And I'll go through those as we are building our tabletop pot holder. So let's go ahead and let's get started. What I have done for us today is I've put together the pieces and parts that we are going to need. For instance, in front of me right here are those internal layers that I just got done showing you. So let me explain what they are. I have here two pieces of low loft batting. You can use one, but for my mom's table, I chose to use two. They had said that it had a far better insulation to it that way. The third layer that I have inside of here, and notice I keep my instructions, and I always do when I'm working with a specialty fabric, is I have the Insul-Bright, and this is the kind that will reflect heat. There's many kinds that you can get, but you want to make sure that you do get the one that can be used as a pot holder. And you're going to know it because on its label, it has a pot holder, a mitt on it, so you know that's the purpose for it. So I'm going to put this aside, and let's look at these things, shall we? When I'm talking about low loft batting, what I'm talking about is the smallest depth of batting that you can find. You can purchase this at any fabric store or craft store, or if you know a quilter, they'll probably just give it to you just so they can clean out their stash. The next one, again, I purchased at a craft store, and I did make sure it was the Insul-Bright, and I did make sure that it did reflect that heat off of the surface. Now, if you were just doing a simple pot holder, you would only need one of the pieces. If you're doing something like you're going to be putting it on an heirloom, then you probably want to use the extra piece. For today, I'm going to go ahead and make mine 3 layers deep rather than those 4th layers. So let me explain. What we have is our Insul-Bright, and then I have my batting. Those are my 2 internal layers. The next thing I'm doing is I'm coming over here. Now, when I first made my pot holders, they're pretty darn big. They are. So I thought for today's demonstration, I'd cut down the size a little bit. And so this particular one looks like a table topper rather than the table runner. And the only difference is the length of the fabric. So you want to measure the surface of which you are going to be placing this on, and then that would be your diagram or your pattern for what you're going to build. This is what we call a fat quarter. I have 2 of them, and the reason I chose these colors is this is some of the colors that I have in my kitchen, and I wanted it to match a little bit. I have 2 of them, and these are 20 by 20. But like I said, you can put any size that you like as long as you have your layers. Now, the reason I have 2 is because we have a front and we have a back to our pot holder with our center. Now, what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to pull the top fat quarter that I have, and I'm going to turn it upside down, and I'm going to put right sides together. All right? Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's not sewing sometimes, just isn't perfect. However, you want to get it so that you have the Insel Bright on one layer, you have your batting next, you have the bottom of your pot holder facing up, and then you have the top of the pot holder facing down. Now, I'm going to just run a seam on 3 sides, just 3 sides. The reason being is because I have to turn it right side out. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to come over to my machines and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew those sides. And I want you to know I'm using an extra large stitch, and I'll explain that when I come back. All right, we're back. Now what you're going to see is that I have sewn all 3 sides of my 4 sides, leaving my end one open so that I can flip my fabric inside out. But before we do that, I want to give you a couple of little tips. First one is I use a ruler and a rotary cutter, but you can use a simple pair of scissors, and I cut or trim off up to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And the reason I do this is so it takes away bulk for when I flip it right side out. The next thing I do is I cut off these different corners here. And that again, if you snip them, don't hit the threads, but if you snip those off, when you go to flip this right side out, it's going to allow those corners to lay nice and flat. Now, if your machine is giving you some difficulty by going through layers, you do or can get a walking foot. Now, a walking foot is specifically designed to attach to a sewing machine just like a regular foot, but what it does is it helps pull those thick layers through the machine for the machine to sew properly. The next thing I do, and this is a tip, is I put in a needle that is meant for layers or thick fabric. That also helps the machine when it comes to sewing together these many layers. So I went ahead and I cut the ends and I've trimmed the sides. But I have another trick that I do, and I didn't read this in a book and I didn't learn it from anybody. It's just through the years of practice of making these kinds of pot holders and other items and crafts that I have put together through the years. And one of them is before I get to the end of my seam, I actually stop about a 1/2 inch away from the end. And then when I'm done, I turn those ends under and I give them a press. Once I do that, I'm going to turn this over. I trim my Insel Bright with my scissors across that wherever the press line is at. And the reason I do that is because when I turn this right side out, I want to be able to sew this final seam, and so it will be nice and flat and easy to put together. I'll show you that when I get this thing turned right side out. Now, what I have to do is I have to actually put my hand between the fabric itself. Not between the fabric and the Insel Bright or the batting, but between the fabric. And I'm going to put my arm in there and I'm going to grab a corner. And I'm going to gently pull it through. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab another corner and I'm going to gently pull it through. And I'm just going to give it some pushing and give it a shake and a pull until it lays nice and flat. Now, sometimes the corners will bunch up like this, and that's normal. All right, sometimes you're lucky it gets a little bit flatter, but I use a bamboo stick, but you don't have to. You can use something that is safe. And when I say safe, it can be the end of a spoon or something that does not have any sharp edges or a way for you to get hurt or cut your hand. And you just simply reach in and you poke or punch through until you get the corner to go and lay down nice and flat. Make sure you don't put the actual thing completely through because you could cut or you could tear your fabric, and you don't want to do that. I also take a minute and I push it down so that the insulation lays nice and low. And here is that end. Let me show you this now. Here's that end. Now what I can do is I have it folded and pressed just like I told you. You could do this before. I tend to do mine afterwards because I want to make sure I get my Insel Bright and everything all lined up. I can turn those under and then I turn under the second part, and I get it to start laying flat. Because our last seam, we're going to sew right across the top of the fabric. And then I'm going to continue my seams all the way around. Now I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to do that. And then when I come back, I want to show you how you can secure your batting and your insulation or Insulbright inside of there so it doesn't twist up when you wash it. So give me a moment and I will be right back with those seams in place. All right, I went ahead and I put all of my seams on. This was my opened end, and if you notice, nice folding down, and I just ran the seam across, and then I followed through all the way. Now when I got to the corners, all I did was leave my needle down, lift the foot, and then turn the fabric until I was ready to do the next side. And I followed through all the way around as one single seam. Now you could stop here if you wanted to. However, I do want to show you one little trick, and the reason I'd like to do that is because when you wash these, the insides can bunch up and get in the center and just get all ruffled, and it's not very attractive. So what I do is I tie mine off. I can also quilt it if I wanted to, but this particular one is so cute, I think I like it just the way it is, so I'm going to put a little tie off on it instead. A tie off or tie down means that you're going to put a piece of yarn through the fabric and then bring it back up and tie it in a knot and secure it. That will hold the batting in place. You can put many in, 1, 2, but you should at least have one if you're going to do this method. The next thing I have is a little cork, and I use a cork. My hands aren't as strong as they used to be, where I used to be able to just put the needle in and pull it back through. It's not so much, too much pressure on my hands now. So what I do is I use a cork and I place it under my actual fabric, but then I also have something called an awl. Now these are dangerous. I'm going to tell you that right away. They have the point on them, but they are meant as a garment tool. And so what I do is I find my dead center and I'm going to poke one hole on one side and one hole on the other. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to take my tapestry or my yarn needles and I'm going to put some yarn in it and I will feed it through to tie it. So give me a second and I'll go ahead and do that. See, just a little push for one side and a little push for the other side. And I am good to go to feed my needle, and I will be right back. All right, I went ahead and if you see, I have placed my yarn through one side and pulled it from the other side up, and I tied a knot and then I tied a bow. Can you see? Let me show you the other side. You see? Right there. It's very tiny. I used a brighter color so you could see it on the camera. And now you are ready to go. You have yourself a pot holder that's larger than the average pot holder that you buy from the store, but you can put a large bowl on, or if you had it the 4 layers rather than the 3, then you could also put a pan on it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you go ahead and you make one, please don't be afraid to send me a snapshot. I'd love to see your product. You have a great day, and I'll see you next month on our next Saturday Sewing.